All right, so we were at the end of 531. There was a couple other things I wanted to point out. A lot of superlatives, right? Like, we've turned a noun into its adjective. We recognize this word as a noun, although it is used adjectively, sometimes friendly. And here it's the superlative version of that, right? And another superlative, longissimo, augmene, and another superlative, maximis, impedimentis. So, just be aware of making sure you translate them that way. That's often forgotten. We're like, a long column and, big baggage, but we'll make sure we get that superlative translation in there. So, moving on to 532. Our guys have set out from the camp finally, and here's what the hostes are doing. We get the after clause, right? Or after, or really like since they runted what was going on in our camp. This was part of our OPSEC essay. How they learned what was going on in our camp. Here's what they did. With colocatis in city east, bipertito in silvis, opportuno, haque occulto, loco. They were expectabanting the adventum of the Romanum. And we do get some numbers, right? So numbers have come into play recently. We need to know how many people are in a legion and a cohort and all of that. But also, we get them when we're talking about milia possum, 2 miles, 2,000 paces. Both ways we can translate that, around 2 miles or around 2,000 paces. But if you're going to put a number in there, like, it's not 2,000 miles. So just make sure you're keeping them straight. And when maior, okay, so not superlative, but comparative, when a rather great part of the column had descended, had gone into a great convalem. Right? And this is, look, we got 2 forms of magnus, right? We got maior, we got magnam, and we have a name for that, right? And this one's harder to notice because they don't look exactly the same, or they don't look that much similar, but we should recognize that maior is the comparative of magnam. And so we're comparing, like, it's not just polyptoton for no reason, right? It's like, why does this word keep showing up? What exactly is our author showing here? And he's showing that, okay, so we got a valley, and maybe I'll draw it from the side, grass and like another hill. Maybe, because sometimes valleys have like a little stream running through them. But so we got a long, narrow column. Well, when the larger part, when the majority of the column, a bunch of dudes, right? They're in a line. Ants go marching. Dave Matthews song. When the larger part of the column has entered into this large valley, and then we have to ask, like, okay, well, what makes a valley large? A valley has several dimensions. It has, of course, this is 3D because that's the direction of travel. It has width, right? But probably this is not a wide valley, because we talked about that it's a narrow column. It's a long, narrow column. It's probably a narrow valley, right? The wider the valley, the less valley-ish it is. So it's probably not talking about that direction. We could be talking about how it's it's long lengthwise, or the magnum here could refer to this dimension, right? It's height. It's like vertically very valley-ish. So just something to consider there in the way he's using what would be a vague adjective for us. From either side, they say ostenderunt, they showed themselves, and they began to oppress the freshest dudes, right? The dudes most recently having entered the valley is what's going on there, and the first one, and to keep the first ones from their ascent, from moving on up out of the valley, to keep the ones at the front, the first ones, from getting up out of the valley, and in a very unfair place, they began to commit battle against our guys, or maybe even from an unfair, very inequitable place. And again, superlative, lots of them. So I don't know necessarily want to say that we're exaggerating here, but Caesar is really making sure we see these extremes. I didn't point out at the time, in 529 we get a comparative adverb somewhere. Where is it? There's like a durious in here somewhere. Do you see it? Right, what was, if there was nothing rather severe, they would arrive at the nearest legion, at the nearest legion, with no danger. And it's almost like, what do we mean when we say, like, if nothing was rather harsh? It's the opposite of when he's using all these superlatives. It's where it's almost like it's like a euphemism. What does he mean by something rather harsh or nothing rather harsh? He means like if we don't get attacked. So some of these superlatives are to really draw out those details, and then like this comparative here is doing the exact opposite. It's euphemistically avoiding the detail of what we're trying to say. So there we are in the valley. 533. We didn't translate this, but we talked a lot about it. Look, this is the passage where we get either a commercial for like stomach medication, I feel like, or this is the orb, right? This is an overhead view, an aerial view of the valley, and this is our guys in our defensive orb. And we got a really nice depiction of Cotta here, and he's juxtaposed with a bad depiction of Sabinus. Sabinus, who had provided nothing ahead of time. He was trepidareing and concursareing and disponereing, right? And these are, I want to say these are historical infinitives, right? There's no other reason that these are infinitives. We haven't talked about this a lot. We call them historical infinitives. Some people jokingly call them hysterical infinitives. It's when your verbs are infinitives just because like there's too much going on to bother conjugating them. Their main verbs were not in an indirect statement. There's a there's a relative clause that has a normal subjunctive verb and an ut clause that has a subjunctive verb and then a because clause that has a normal indicative verb and a relative clause back with its indicative verb. But I think these infinitives here are for no other reason than to show the chaos here. We call them historical infinitives. So Titurius is, crazy. And Cotta, who had cogitaseted versus nihil providiceted, and that's why he hadn't been a proponent of setting out. And he was lacking. If there's anything, we use the word nothing with regards to Cotta, it's that he lacked nothing. And in appellandying and cohortandying, gerundatives, his soldiers, because they're both, ablative with the militibus, he was showing off the duties of a general, and in fighting, he was showing off the duties of a soldier. And that's when, unfortunately, he had to announce that they should abandon their stuff and get in the circle. So, worth rereading, and it has this consequence. And we had that, it's not to be scolded, but it unfortunately had this outcome that our guys got all scared, and we had comparative and stuff. Superlatives. So, and everything was filled with crying and weeping, which is super sad. 34, more about the orb, the barbarians, right? A plan was not lacking to the barbarians, just like it wasn't lacking to Cotta. And this is where we see that they were our equals. And it's interesting because they had a plan and so did Cotta, so it's almost like they were equal to Cotta. They were better than Sabinus, but equal to Cotta is one way to look at it. We do see that even though things are going bad, we're starting to see that our guys are still being courageous. And we had that, the cohort advances from the circle. And the standards come in here at the end. And in 35, our guys that were doing exception. Oh no, this is where the cohorts did their, yeah, wherever they rushed forward, right? That's where the enemies were fleeing really swiftly, but it left a side exposed, and then when this cohort went back, it was recovered by the guys around it, and each group had a part. So you should know one part of this really well, so make sure you review the parts that the other groups translated. And we get exceptional individuals at the end of this passage, and they had cool deaths, right? For Titus Balventius, a cool dude, each femur is pierced, and Quintus Lucanius, now he's nominative, so it's a different construction. Fighting is interficated. And Lucius Cotta, the legatus, ad hortans, and I think we just saw him ad hortansing. Didn't we? Performing the duties of all kinds of people. Maybe it was in 32, 33. Where was he? Oh yeah. He was cohortandying, and now he's ad hortansing, but it's still showing us the same thing. And he's not killed yet, but he's wounded. So not going super well. The guy that was hit in the face, right? I think I skipped that. So in 36, we get what happened with Sabinus, right? How is he reacting in the midst of all this turmoil, right after our 3 casualties? What does he do? He doesn't even go himself, so he hasn't learned his lesson. Now Ambiorix is the one cohortanting. So again, we're actually comparing Ambiorix word-wise and equals-wise with Cotta, which is interesting. So he sends his interpreter, asking him to spare his guys, and we know that spare takes the dative, right, to give pardon to, not really a dative object, but it's a dative object. And that guy, having been addressed, responded, "Hey, come talk to me. I'm approachable. I'm safe." And he's like, "Hey, Cotta, should I go talk with Ambiorix?" And Cotta's like, "Nah." There's our posse again. But Cotta's like, "Nah." And you guys in class have done 37, 38, and 39. Arguably, the episode ends at 37, but I had you continue to 39. 37, we see that Sabinus truly never learned, and he orders his guys to follow him, which proves to be ruinous for him and for his guys. Oh, and look, if we've talked about Sabinus and his participles before, here's an interesting one. Having been ordered to lay down his weapons, he does as commanded. So now his participle means he was taking orders from an enemy. So that's really interesting. And here, while they're talking about their conditions, and Ambiorix is given a rather long speech, and that's on purpose, here's where the participles really count, right? Circumventus, he is interficated. And we get them shouting in their custom, and then Cotta with his opposite participle, right? And that's the pugnans, interficator. And then we get the Aquilofair, and how he dies, pugnans, occiditur. And I think I'm gonna end the speech here. We see Ambiorix capitalizing on his victory in 38 and 39. You have the video for that. But what I want to remind you of, there's a lot of speeches in this episode, and mostly they're indirect speech. There is one time when Sabinus says winkete, and it's direct speech, and I would look back at that and notice, like, what's the difference in the indirect or the direct speech? But also that speeches were, when Romans told history and the Greeks before them, they loved crafting speeches for people, from the Iliad through Thucydides through Caesar. It is fun to write what a person might have said. And we didn't have recording devices. We don't know what they said, so it's the author, it's like the author's creative license to give a really good speech for somebody when they want one, or a really bad speech when they think they want one. So Caesar gets to make up a lot through these speeches. So, good luck, happy studying, have a great weekend, test on Tuesday. See you tutorial Monday.